Elena Morrison survived 30 years alone in the Appalachian Mountains, trusting no one after tragedy claimed her family. When a desperate stranger appears with 3 orphaned girls, offering skilled labor for shelter, Elena faces an impossible choice: maintain the isolation that kept her safe, or risk everything for children who desperately need her. As secrets emerge and the mountain itself threatens their fragile sanctuary, Elena discovers that true survival isn't about isolation. It's about the courage to trust again and build a family from broken pieces. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Appalachian Mountains stretched endlessly before her, their ridges cloaked in morning mist that rose like ghosts from the valleys below. Elena Morrison moved through the forest with the quiet confidence of someone who had made peace with solitude. Her boots pressed into damp earth, leaving faint impressions that would disappear with the next rain. The scent of pine and moss filled her lungs, familiar as her own breath. For 30 years, this forest had been her only companion. Elena tended her garden with meticulous care, checked her traps each dawn, and ensured that her log cabin, built with her own hands after the landslide that had claimed everything, remained sturdy against wind, rain, and the crushing weight of mountain snow. But today felt different. The forest whispered warnings she couldn't quite interpret. Broken twigs caught her attention first, then flattened underbrush. Elena crouched, examining the tracks. A man's boot prints, followed by 3 smaller sets. Her fingers brushed the handle of her hunting knife as she straightened, eyes scanning the tree line. Strangers in these mountains were rare, and rarely brought good news. She spotted them before they saw her. A tall, broad-shouldered man emerged from between the pines, his weathered face speaking of hard years and harder choices. Behind him, 3 girls trailed like nervous shadows, the eldest, perhaps 12, protective and watchful, the middle child around 8, clutching a worn satchel, and the youngest, barely 5, alternating between fear and curiosity as she tugged at the man's sleeve. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her expression remained neutral. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness in the mountains invited disaster. "Morning, ma'am," the stranger called, his voice carrying careful respect across the clearing. "Name's Ethan Marshall. I mean no harm. These girls with me. They're hungry, and we've been traveling far. I'm hoping you might hear me out." Eleanor studied him from her position near the cabin door, one hand resting on the weathered frame. The children looked exhausted, their clothes dusty and worn, their faces bearing the particular gauntness that came from too many missed meals. But desperation could make people dangerous, and she'd survived this long by trusting her instincts over her sympathies. "Hungry girls?" she repeated, her tone measured. "And what exactly do you expect from me?" Ethan knelt slightly, making himself less threatening as he adjusted the youngest girl's coat with gentle hands. "I'm a builder, ma'am." "A good one. I can construct a cabin that'll stand against any storm these mountains throw at it." He gestured toward her modest structure. "I'm asking for food for them, just until we find our footing. In exchange, I'll build you something that'll last generations." Elena's gaze swept over the children again. The eldest, the man would later introduce her as Lily, stood with squared shoulders, despite obvious exhaustion, ready to defend her sisters if needed. The middle child, Sophie, held her satchel like a lifeline, dark eyes darting between Eleanor and the forest as if expecting betrayal from either direction. Little Maggie fidgeted at Ethan's side, hunger and weariness battling with a child's natural resilience. The offer was tempting. Elena had spent countless brutal winters reinforcing her cabin, patching holes, and praying the structure would hold. A proper home, built by skilled hands, would change everything. But accepting strangers meant risking the carefully maintained boundaries that had kept her safe and sane for 3 decades. She weighed the calculation in her mind, the potential for betrayal against the comfort of a sturdy roof, the danger of trusting against the loneliness she'd almost stopped noticing. Ethan's face showed no obvious deceit, but Elena had learned that the worst lies often wore honest expressions. The girls whispered among themselves, soft voices that carried surprising clarity in the mountain air. Lily leaned close to Ethan, murmuring something that made him shake his head with a faint smile. The gesture was tender, protective, the kind of care that couldn't be easily faked. Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight control she'd maintained for so long. Perhaps it was foolishness. Perhaps it was the first step toward disaster. But looking at those three exhausted children, she recognized something of her own past losses reflected in their eyes. "You can stay," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tumult of doubt churning inside her. "But there are rules. You respect this land, respect my home, and follow my directions without question. That's the deal. Nothing more, nothing less." Relief washed over Ethan's features. "Understood. You won't regret this, ma'am. You have my word." "Words are easy in the mountains," Elena replied. "It's actions that matter. We'll see if yours measure up." The girls relaxed visibly, their small shoulders dropping as tension eased. Maggie even managed a tentative smile that tugged at something Elena had thought long dead in her heart. She turned toward the cabin, gesturing for them to follow. "Come on, then. You'll need food before anything else. After that, we'll discuss this cabin of yours." As they crossed the threshold into her small, carefully maintained space, Elena caught Ethan's eye. In that brief exchange, unspoken questions and tentative trust passed between them. She had opened her door to strangers, breaking decades of self-imposed isolation. The mountains would test this decision, she was certain. They always did, but as the children settled cautiously around her modest table and she began preparing a simple meal, Elena wondered if perhaps the greatest test wouldn't come from the wilderness outside, but from her own guarded heart, learning to open again. Dawn arrived with golden light filtering through pine needles, casting dappled patterns across Elena's cabin floor. She woke before the sun fully crested the mountains, as always. But the familiar quiet of her morning routine had been replaced by the soft sounds of children breathing, of rustling blankets, and of another person's presence in her carefully ordered world. Ethan had already risen. Through her small window, Elena could see him examining the land near the creek, measuring distances with practiced eyes, occasionally marking something in a worn notebook he carried. The methodical precision of his movements reassured her slightly. Whatever else he might be, the man took his craft seriously. The girls stirred one by one. Lily first, sitting up with the cautious alertness of someone who'd learned to wake ready for danger. Sophie next, clutching her worn fabric scrap as she blinked against the morning light. Finally, little Maggie, who bounded up with surprising energy given yesterday's exhaustion, immediately running to peer out the window. "Is that breakfast?" Maggie asked, spotting the pot Elena had set over the fire. "It will be once it's ready," Elena replied, stirring the cornmeal porridge. "You'll help set the table. All of you will earn your keep here, understood?" Lily nodded seriously. "Yes, ma'am. We can work. We're not useless." The defensive edge in the girl's voice made Elena pause. "I didn't say you were, but in the mountains everyone contributes. It's not about worth, it's about survival." She portioned out the porridge, adding berries she'd foraged the previous week. The children ate with restrained eagerness, clearly hungry but trying not to appear desperate. Elena recognized the behavior. Pride was often the last thing people surrendered, even in hardship. After breakfast, she led them outside into the crisp morning air. "If you're staying, even temporarily, you need to understand how things work here. The mountains aren't forgiving of ignorance or carelessness." She pointed to a gnarled oak at the clearing's edge. "Firewood comes from fallen branches, never living trees unless absolutely necessary. You check for dryness, for rot, for insects. Watch." Elena demonstrated selecting suitable branches, breaking them cleanly, stacking them for proper drying. The girls imitated her movements with varying degrees of success. Lily caught on quickly, her hands steady and deliberate. Sophie worked more slowly, but with careful attention to detail. Maggie's enthusiasm exceeded her coordination, resulting in several dropped branches and one pinched finger that required Elena's attention. "Patience," Elena murmured, examining Maggie's finger. "The forest rewards attention, not speed." Ethan worked nearby, beginning the preliminary measurements for the new cabin. Elena watched him periodically, noting his expertise, but also his careful interactions with the girls. He offered guidance without condescension, demonstrated techniques without impatience, and maintained a protective awareness of their locations, even while focused on his work. By mid-morning, a minor crisis erupted. Maggie, unable to contain her curiosity, darted toward the underbrush, chasing a butterfly. Elena's heart lurched into her throat. "Maggie, stop!" But Ethan was already moving, his longer legs covering the uneven ground quickly. He caught up to Maggie just before she reached a patch of poison ivy, scooping her up gently but firmly. "The forest isn't a playground," he said, his tone serious but not harsh. "There are dangers everywhere. Plants that burn your skin, ground that can give way, animals that don't want to be disturbed. You have to stay where we can see you." Maggie's lower lip trembled. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to see the butterfly." Elena approached, kneeling to meet Maggie's eyes. "Curiosity isn't wrong, but curiosity without caution gets people killed out here. Your sisters need you safe. We all do, understand?" The child nodded solemnly, and Elena saw understanding dawn in her young eyes. This wasn't about punishment, it was about survival. The distinction mattered. The afternoon progressed with lessons in water collection from the creek, identification of edible versus poisonous plants, and the basics of fire maintenance. Lily absorbed information like parched earth soaking up rain. Sophie asked thoughtful questions that revealed a keen observational mind. Maggie's attention wandered occasionally, but her natural resilience and cheerfulness kept spirits high even during tedious tasks. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, Elena felt the weight of her decision settling more firmly. These children were her responsibility now, at least temporarily. Their safety, their education in mountain survival, their very lives depended on her choices. The burden was familiar yet strange. She'd shouldered responsibility before, decades ago, but time had made her forget its particular heaviness. During a brief rest, Ethan approached with his notebook. "I've mapped out the foundation," he said, showing her rough sketches. "The slope by the creek offers good drainage, solid ground. If we place the cabin here," he pointed, "it'll be protected from the worst winds, but get good sun." Elena studied his plans, impressed despite herself by the thoroughness of his design. "You've done this before." "Many times," he confirmed. "Built homes across 3 states, though none in terrain quite this challenging. But challenges just mean you need better planning and better execution," Elena added. "Plans fail if the follow-through isn't solid." "True enough." Ethan's gaze held hers for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. "Thank you for trusting us this far. I know it isn't easy. Trust is earned, not given," Elena replied. "You're off to a decent start, but we've only just begun." That evening, as the family, Elena caught herself using that word and felt a strange mix of discomfort and warmth, gathered for supper. The conversation flowed more easily than the previous night. The girls shared small stories from their journey, carefully edited, but revealing glimpses of hardship and resilience. Ethan spoke of towns they'd passed through, work he'd done, always circling around, but never quite explaining why they'd been traveling at all. Elena listened more than she spoke, cataloging information, watching for inconsistencies. She wanted to trust them. Some part of her that had been dormant for decades yearned for connection. But survival instinct warred with that desire, reminding her that trust misplaced could be fatal. As darkness fell and the girls settled into their sleeping area, Ethan lingered by the door. "You're good with them," he observed quietly. "Patient but firm. They respond to that." "I'm not doing anything special," Elena deflected. "Just teaching what needs teaching." "It's more than that." Ethan's expression was thoughtful in the firelight. "You're giving them something they've lacked. Stability, structure, someone who expects things of them because she believes they're capable. That matters more than you might think. Elena felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Well, mountain life requires capability from everyone, no exceptions. After Ethan retreated to his own sleeping space outside, Elena sat alone by the dying fire, listening to the familiar night sounds of the forest. Somewhere in the darkness an owl called. The creek murmured its endless song, and inside her cabin, 3 children slept peacefully, while a stranger who'd become an unexpected partner rested nearby. The weight of responsibility pressed down, but beneath it, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in 30 years, purpose beyond mere survival. These people needed her, yes, but perhaps she needed them too. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring more work, more lessons, more tests of this fragile arrangement. But tonight, as Elena finally let sleep claim her, she allowed herself the smallest hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice after all. The third day dawned cool and damp, moisture clinging to everything like a second skin. Elena woke to find Ethan already working, the sound of his hatchet rhythmic against wood. She dressed quickly, noting that the girls were still sleeping. Lily curled protectively around her younger sisters, even in rest maintaining her guardian role. Outside, the clearing was transforming. Ethan had cleared brush, marked boundaries with stakes and string, and begun cutting timber to precise specifications. His movements were efficient, economical, the work of someone who'd performed these tasks thousands of times. "You're up early," Elena observed, crossing to where he worked. "Habit," Ethan replied, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool air. "Also wanted to make progress before the girls wake. They'll want to help, but some of this work isn't safe for children." Elena nodded approval. At least he had sense about risk management. "What do you need from me today?" "Honestly, your expertise on the land. I know building, but you know these specific mountains, where the water flows in heavy rain, where the wind hits hardest, what the wildlife patterns are. That local knowledge is worth more than any carpentry skill." They spent the next hour walking the site together, Elena pointing out subtle features Ethan's experienced eye had missed. A depression that would collect water during storms, a game trail that suggested bears pass through regularly, rock formations that indicated solid ground versus areas prone to erosion. "You read this land like a book," Ethan remarked. "Had to learn," Elena replied simply. "After the landslide that took my family, I rebuilt alone. Every mistake could have been fatal. You learn quickly when your life depends on it." It was the most she'd revealed about her past, and Ethan respected the vulnerability by not pressing for more. They worked in companionable silence after that, adjusting his plans to incorporate her knowledge. The girls emerged mid-morning, Lily already organizing her sisters for the day. "What are our tasks?" she asked Elena directly, her serious demeanor making her seem older than her 12 years. Elena assigned them age-appropriate work, gathering kindling, organizing tools, collecting stones from the creek for the foundation. She demonstrated each task first, emphasizing safety and proper technique. The girls listened attentively, though Maggie's attention occasionally wandered toward butterflies or interesting leaves. By noon, they'd established a rhythm. Ethan worked on felling and preparing timber. Elena reinforced the creek bank to prevent erosion that could undermine the foundation. The girls shuttled materials, learned practical skills, and gradually grew more comfortable in the mountain environment. The work was interrupted by a commotion from the creek. Sophie had slipped on wet rocks, falling into shallow water. She wasn't hurt, but the shock and cold had her crying, scared and embarrassed in equal measure. Elena reached her first, pulling the girl from the water and checking quickly for injuries. "You're all right. No harm done except to your pride." "I'm sorry," Sophie sobbed. "I was trying to get the best stones like you showed us. And you'll try again once you're dry and warm," Elena said firmly. "Everyone falls in these mountains. What matters is getting back up and learning from it." Back at the cabin, Elena helped Sophie into dry clothes, noting how thin the girl was, how her ribs showed too prominently. These children had been hungry for more than just a few days. Whatever circumstances had brought them to Ethan's care, they hadn't been easy. Elena? Sophie's small voice interrupted her thoughts. Are you going to send us away? Why would I do that? Because I was clumsy. Because I'm trouble. Elena's heart clenched. Listen to me, Sophie. Slipping on wet rocks doesn't make you trouble. It makes you human. We all make mistakes. What matters is whether we learn from them. My mama used to say something like that, Sophie whispered, then looked stricken as if she'd revealed too much. Elena chose her words carefully. Your mama sounds like she was wise. You honor her memory by remembering her lessons. When they returned outside, Lily intercepted them, relief stark on her young face. Is Sophie okay? She's fine, Elena assured her. Just wet and a little scared. Nothing that won't pass. Lily's shoulders relaxed marginally. I should have been watching her closer. You're her sister, not her jailer, Elena said gently. And you're 12. You can't prevent every stumble. None of us can. As they settled in for the night, Elena caught Ethan's eye. They shared a long look that acknowledged the gravity of their situation, the dangers ahead, and the tentative trust being built between them. We'll face whatever comes, Elena said quietly. As a family. And in that moment, despite all the risks and uncertainties, she meant it completely. Dawn broke clear and cold, the air scrubbed clean by yesterday's storm. Elena woke to find the cabin's interior damp but intact. Small pools of water caught in bowls, scattered across the floor. The girls were still sleeping, exhausted by tension and weather, but Ethan sat near the door, keeping watch. Couldn't sleep? Elena asked, keeping her voice low. He shook his head. Old habit. After 2 years of running, rest doesn't come easy, Elena understood. She'd spent years after her family's death waking at every sound, unable to fully surrender to sleep's vulnerability. We need to check the cabin site, she said. Storm like that could have done damage. They left the girls sleeping under Lily's watchful eye. The eldest had woken when they stirred and walked to where the new cabin was taking shape. Elena's fears were confirmed. The foundation had held, but several support beams had loosened. Tools were scattered across the clearing, and one section of timber had tumbled down the slope toward the creek. Could have been worse, Ethan assessed. But his voice was tight with frustration. Still, it's setback we didn't need. Then we fix it, Elena replied simply. Mountains teach you that progress isn't linear. 2 steps forward, 1 back, sometimes sideways. What matters is persistence. They worked through the morning, resecuring beams, reorganizing materials, and reinforcing vulnerable areas. The girls joined them after breakfast, each contributing according to their abilities. Even Maggie helped, carrying small pieces of debris to designated piles, her cheerfulness a bright counterpoint to the adults' grim determination. By midday, they'd recovered most of the lost ground. Elena was securing a timber brace when she noticed Ethan watching her with an odd expression. What? She asked. Just thinking how you move, he replied. Like you've done this kind of work all your life. Not many people have that kind of practical competence. Competence is survival in the mountains, Elena said, but she felt oddly warmed by the observation. She'd grown unused to being seen, much less appreciated for her skills. Their partnership had evolved into something remarkable. Ethan brought structural expertise and raw strength. Elena contributed terrain knowledge and survival instinct. Together, they worked with an efficiency that belied their short acquaintance, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with looks and gestures as much as words. The afternoon brought a new challenge. The creek, swollen by storm runoff, had undercut its banks near where they'd planned to run a drainage system. The erosion threatened to spread toward the cabin foundation if left unchecked. We need to redirect the flow, Elena said, studying the problem. Build a rock barrier here, create a new channel there. That's heavy work, Ethan observed. And we'd need to work in the water. No choice. Let it go, and we lose everything we've built. They spent hours in the icy creek, hauling stones, building a crude but effective barrier. The cold numbed Elena's legs to the point of pain, but she pushed through, knowing that stopping meant failure. Beside her, Ethan worked with equal determination. His hands scraped raw from rock handling. The girls helped from the shore, passing smaller stones, offering encouragement. Lily showed particular aptitude for understanding the engineering challenge, suggesting adjustments that actually improved their design. Sophie kept watch on Maggie, preventing the youngest from trying to join them in the dangerous water. Finally, as the sun began its descent, they'd succeeded. The creek now flowed in its redirected channel, leaving the foundation area safe. Elena and Ethan dragged themselves onto dry land, shaking with cold and exhaustion. "Get to the cabin," Elena commanded the girls. "Start a fire, big one. We need to warm up before hypothermia sets in." Lily grabbed her sisters and ran. Elena and Ethan followed more slowly, supporting each other as feeling returned painfully to numb limbs. By the time they reached the cabin, Lily had indeed built a fire, larger than Elena usually permitted, but exactly what they needed. They huddled near the flames, gradually regaining warmth and function. The girls brought blankets, hot tea brewed from foraged herbs, and their own small bodies pressed close for shared heat. The intimacy of the moment, all of them crowded together, vulnerable and interdependent, would have felt suffocating to the Elena of a month ago. "Now it felt necessary, right? That was brave," Lily said quietly. "What you did, both of you, that was necessary," Elena corrected gently. "In the mountains, you do what needs doing, or you lose everything. It's not about bravery, it's about commitment." "Still brave," Sophie insisted, her shy voice firm. Elena didn't argue further. As warmth returned and danger passed, exhaustion pulled at her. She found herself leaning against Ethan without consciously deciding to. Her body seeking comfort her mind hadn't yet fully accepted was safe to want. "We make a good team," Ethan murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "We survived a crisis," Elena replied, "but she didn't pull away." "That's not the same as being a team, isn't it?" She had no answer for that. Or rather, she had too many answers, all of them complicated by the walls she'd built around her heart over 3 decades of solitude. That evening, as the girls slept and the fire burned low, Elena and Ethan talked properly for the first time about the danger they faced. He told her about the men hunting the children, ruthless, connected, persistent. He described near misses in previous towns, times when they'd had to flee with barely any warning. "They won't think to look here," Ethan said, hope and doubt warring in his voice. "Not in mountains this remote, with no obvious connection to me or the girls." "Maybe," Elena allowed. "But we need to be prepared anyway. I know these mountains, know how to disappear if we have to. But the girls need to learn, too. Real survival skills, not just basic camping. Will you teach them?" "Already am," Elena replied. "But we'll increase the intensity. They need to be able to survive on their own, if it comes to that." The thought was grim but necessary. In the mountains, preparation meant the difference between life and death. And if these children faced threats beyond normal wilderness dangers, they needed every advantage Elena could provide. Over the following days, the routine intensified. Mornings were devoted to cabin construction, but afternoons became intensive survival training. Elena taught the girls to read weather signs, to find water sources, to build emergency shelters. She showed them which plants were edible and which deadly, how to start fires without matches, how to navigate by stars and landmarks. Lily absorbed everything with fierce concentration. Sophie proved unexpectedly skilled at plant identification, her observant nature and good memory serving her well. Even Maggie, young as she was, learned basic skills that might save her life someday. Ethan watched these lessons with mixed emotions Elena could read on his face. Gratitude for the skills being taught. Grief that such knowledge was necessary for children so young. "They shouldn't have to know this," he said one evening. "No," Elena agreed. "They shouldn't, but they do, so we teach them. Dwelling on won't keep them alive." The cabin progressed steadily. Walls rose, a roof took shape, windows were framed and shuttered. The structure was solid, built to withstand mountain winters and whatever other storms might come. Working on it gave all of them purpose, something to build toward beyond mere survival. One afternoon, while Elena and Lily worked on reinforcing a wall section, the girl spoke quietly. "Thank you for keeping us, for teaching us, for not sending us away when you learned the truth." Elena's hands stilled on the timber. "You don't have to thank me for basic decency." "Yes, I do," Lily insisted. "Most people wouldn't take the risk, wouldn't want the trouble. You did, and that matters." Elena looked at this serious child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who carried burdens no 12-year-old should bear. "You matter," Elena said simply. "All of you. That makes the risk worthwhile." Lily's eyes filled with tears. She blinked back determinedly. "We'll do our best not to be trouble. We'll work hard, follow your rules, whatever you need." "I need you to be children," Elena replied. "To laugh, play, learn. Yes, you work. Everyone works in the mountains. But you also get to just be, understand." The girl nodded, and Elena saw something shift in her expression, a tentative permission to let go of some of the responsibility she'd claimed as armor against her trauma. That night, Elena lay awake, listening to the forest sounds that had been her only companions for so long. But now they were punctuated by the soft breathing of 3 children and the occasional movement of the man who'd brought them into her life. Her solitude was well and truly shattered. Surprisingly, she found she didn't mind as much as she'd expected. The noise, the needs, the constant presence of others, it was exhausting, yes. But it was also alive in a way her isolated existence had not been for 3 decades. She thought about the creek work, about the storm, about the shared meals and lessons and small moments of laughter. She thought about Ethan's steady presence and the way the girls were beginning to look at her with trust rather than wariness. Maybe, Elena thought as sleep finally claimed her, she'd been wrong all these years. Maybe survival wasn't about isolation and self-sufficiency. Maybe the strongest survival strategy was connection, community, the willingness to rely on and be relied upon by others. It was a radical thought for someone who'd spent so long alone. But as she drifted off, surrounded by the evidence of her chosen family, Elena decided it might just be true. The morning dawned with unusual clarity, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed almost aggressive in its cheerfulness. Elena stood outside the nearly completed cabin, surveying their work with satisfaction, tempered by unease. Today, she knew, they'd face a different kind of challenge. Not from nature, but from other people. Hank Thompson was coming. She'd spotted his approach the previous evening, watching from the tree line before retreating. Now he'd return, bringing with him the judgment of the wider community that lived in the valleys below these mountain ridges. "He's here," Ethan said quietly, appearing at her shoulder. "The man from yesterday. He's coming up the trail." Elena nodded. She'd been expecting this. Word always spread in mountain communities, and strangers caring for orphaned children would naturally draw scrutiny. "Keep the girls inside for now. Let me handle this first." Ethan looked like he wanted to protest, but nodded. "If you need me, I'll call," Elena finished. "But this goes better if it's just me initially." "Trust me." Hank emerged from the trees, tall and weathered, his face carved into permanent suspicion by years of mountain living. He carried a walking stick that doubled as a weapon, and his eyes swept the clearing with the thoroughness of someone assessing potential threats. "Elena," he called, his voice carrying authority despite the respectful distance he maintained. "Got a minute?" "Hank!" Elena moved toward him, stopping several paces away, close enough for conversation, far enough to avoid feeling cornered. "What brings you up this way?" "You know what brings me." Hank's eyes moved past her to the cabin. "Heard you've taken in strangers." "Man and 3 children." "That true?" "It's true." "And you think that's wise? Taking in people you don't know, putting yourself at risk?" Elena chose her words carefully. "I know what I'm doing. The man's a skilled builder. He's helping me construct a proper cabin in exchange for temporary shelter for him and the children." "Temporary?" Hank repeated skeptically. "That cabin looks pretty permanent to me. And those children, where are their parents? Why's this stranger traveling the mountains with orphans?" Their parents are dead, Elena said flatly. The man's protecting them, caring for them. I saw children who needed help, and a man willing to work honestly for it. Seemed like a fair exchange. Hank's jaw worked as he studied her. You've been alone a long time. Elena, maybe so long you've forgotten that strangers bring complications, problems, danger. I haven't forgotten anything, Elena replied, steel entering her voice. I've survived alone for 30 years by being careful and competent. I'm still being careful, but maybe I've also remembered that survival isn't the only thing that matters. Meaning? Meaning those are children who've lost everything. And if I can offer them shelter and safety, I will. Mountain Code says you help those who need it, Hank, or has the village forgotten that? The barb hit home. Mountain communities prided themselves on mutual aid, on supporting neighbors in crisis. Hank's expression flickered with something that might have been shame before hardening again. Mountain Code also says you don't bring trouble to your neighbors, he countered. And outsiders often mean trouble. Then I'll make sure any trouble stays on my land, Elena said. We're not bothering anyone, not asking for anything from the village. Just living our lives up here, and if there's more to the story. If this man's running from something, Elena held his gaze steadily. Then I handle it. My land, my responsibility, my risk. You can tell the village I vouch for them. That'll have to be enough. The standoff stretched, neither giving ground. Finally, Hank shook his head. You're stubborn as they come, Elena Morrison. Always have been. Served me well so far. Maybe. He turned to leave, then paused. But stubbornness can't protect you from everything. You be careful. And if you need help... He trailed off, the offer implicit. I know where the village is, Elena replied, her tone softening marginally. Thank you, Hank. After he disappeared into the trees, Elena released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Ethan emerged from the cabin, the girls peering around him. How bad? He asked. Could have been worse, Elena admitted. He's suspicious but not actively hostile, and he knows I won't budge. The village will watch us, but they won't interfere, not immediately anyway. Will they report us? Lily's voice was small, frightened. Elena knelt to meet the girl's eyes. Report you to who? You're not criminals. You're children who lost your parents. Anyone who wants to separate you will have to go through me first. The fierce protection in her voice surprised even Elena herself. When had these children become hers to defend so absolutely? She couldn't pinpoint the moment, but the truth of it was undeniable. The encounter with Hank cast a shadow over the next few days, but work continued. The cabin was now weather-tight, with proper windows, a sturdy door, and a fireplace that drew smoke efficiently. Inside, they'd created separate sleeping areas, storage for food and supplies, and even a small space for the girls to keep their treasures. It was, Elena realized with some wonder, a home. Not just a shelter, but a place where a family could build a life. It's beautiful, Sophie whispered. Running her hand along the smooth wood of a windowsill, Ethan had spent hours perfecting. It's ours, Maggie declared, with the absolute certainty of the very young. Yes, Elena agreed, feeling the weight and rightness of that simple word. It's ours. That evening, as they shared their first meal in the completed cabin, Elena felt something shift inside her. The walls she'd built around her heart over 3 decades of solitude were crumbling, and she was letting them. These people, this unlikely makeshift family, had become more important than her carefully maintained isolation. To new beginnings, Ethan said, raising his cup of spring water in a toast. To new beginnings, Elena echoed. Meeting his eyes and seeing her own cautious hope reflected there, the girls joined the toast with enthusiasm. And for a moment, the cabin was filled with warmth and possibility. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent. But inside, something fragile and precious was taking root, the kind of connection that could withstand almost anything if tended with care. Elena went to sleep that night with a smile on her face, surrounded by the breathing of her chosen family, and for the first time in 30 years, she felt truly at peace. The weeks following Hank's visit settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Elena woke each morning to the sounds of a household rather than solitude. Maggie's chatter, Sophie's quiet movements, Lily's responsible organizing of her sisters. The cabin that had once echoed with emptiness now thrummed with life, but normalcy, Elena had learned, was usually prelude to challenge. It started with small things. Tools going missing, then reappearing in odd places. Food vanishing from carefully maintained supplies. Elena noticed, but said nothing at first. Watching to see if the pattern would reveal itself, it was Ethan who finally brought it up. "Something's bothering you," he observed one evening after the girls had gone to sleep. Elena considered deflecting, then decided against it. They'd promised honesty. "Things are going missing. Little things, but it's a pattern. You think one of the girls is taking them. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just disorganized for the first time in 30 years because I'm not living alone." She rubbed her temples. "I don't want to accuse anyone without being sure. I'll talk to them," Ethan offered. "No!" Elena's voice was firm. "If someone's taking things, there's a reason. Trauma makes people do strange things. I need to figure out why before addressing it." Over the next days, Elena observed more carefully. She noticed Sophie lingering near the food stores, Lily checking and rechecking supplies as if inventory helped her feel secure. But it was Maggie who finally revealed the truth. Elena found the girl in a hollow tree near the cabin, arranging stolen items in careful rows: dried meat, a spare knife, matches, a small blanket. A survival cache, Elena realized with sudden understanding. Maggie was preparing for the possibility of having to run. "That's quite a collection," Elena said softly, careful not to startle the child. Maggie spun, face crumpling with fear and shame. I'm sorry. Please don't send us away." Elena knelt slowly. "I'm not angry, Maggie, and I'm not sending anyone away. But I need to understand why you're doing this." The girl's words tumbled out in a rush. "Ethan said we always have to be ready, that we might have to leave fast. But what if we get separated? What if I can't keep up? I need my own supplies so I won't slow everyone down." The logic was heartbreaking. A 5-year-old so traumatized by loss and flight that she'd created her own emergency plan. Elena felt her chest tighten with protective fury at whatever had been done to make this child feel so unsafe. "Listen to me," Elena said gently but firmly. "You're not going to be separated. And if we ever have to leave here, we leave together, all of us. You don't need a secret cache because I'm going to make sure you're protected. Understand?" "But what if—" "No what ifs," Elena interrupted. "I'm making you a promise right now. You are safe here. You are wanted here. And you don't have to prepare to survive alone, because you're not alone. You have me and Ethan and your sisters. We're a family, and families stick together." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "Really?" "Really?" Elena opened her arms, and the girl crashed into them, sobbing with the release of fear she'd been carrying far too long. That evening, Elena gathered everyone together. She explained what she'd found, not to shame Maggie, but to address the underlying fear all the children must have been carrying. "I know you've all been taught to be ready to run," Elena said, looking at each girl in turn. "That was necessary when you were traveling, when danger was real and immediate. But here now, things are different. This is home. You're allowed to feel safe. You're allowed to let your guard down. But what if the bad men find us?" Sophie whispered. "Then we deal with it," Elena replied firmly. "Together. But living in constant fear of what might happen means you're not really living at all. I won't let fear steal your childhood more than it already has." Lily's expression was skeptical, the wariness of someone who'd been disappointed before. "You can't promise we're absolutely safe." "Nobody can." "You're right," Elena acknowledged. "I can't promise absolute safety. The mountains don't allow for absolutes. But I can promise that whatever comes, we face it together. And I can promise that you're as safe here as anywhere in this world." "How do you know?" Lily challenged. Elena met the girl's eyes steadily. "Because I've survived in these mountains for 30 years, through blizzards, droughts, injuries, and grief. I know every trail, every hiding spot, every resource within a day's walk. and I know how to protect what's mine. You're mine now. That means something. The simple declaration hung in the air. Lily's skepticism cracked, revealing the frightened child beneath the protective facade. Sophie relaxed marginally. Even Maggie's tears slowed. We're really yours, Maggie asked in a small voice. You're really mine, Elena confirmed. All of you. And I protect what's mine. Ethan's hand found hers, squeezing gently. His eyes reflected gratitude and something deeper, something Elena wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. The next day, Elena turned Maggie's secret cache into a teaching moment. They worked together to create a proper family emergency kit, not hidden, but openly maintained and accessible. Elena explained her reasoning for each item, teaching the girls not just what to pack but why. Survival isn't about hoarding in secret, Elena explained. It's about preparation and knowledge. You need to know what's essential, how to use it, and how to improvise when supplies run out. She taught them to make char cloth for fire starting, to purify water without boiling, to create emergency shelters from natural materials. The lessons were practical but also therapeutic, giving the girls control through competence rather than through anxious preparation for abandonment. Lily proved particularly adept, her sharp mind grasping concepts quickly. Sophie's gentle thoroughness made her excellent at detail-oriented tasks, and Maggie's enthusiasm, once channeled properly, became an asset rather than a liability. You're good at this, Ethan observed, watching Elena teach the girls to identify edible plants. Survival is what I know, Elena replied with a shrug. It's more than that. You're good at understanding what they need, not just physically but emotionally. How they need to feel capable, not just protected. Elena felt uncomfortable with the praise. I'm just doing what needs doing. That's exactly what makes it remarkable, Ethan said quietly. You don't even realize how much you're giving them. That night, as Elena lay in her bed, the cabin now divided into private spaces that offered both togetherness and solitude, she thought about Ethan's words. She'd thought she was teaching survival skills, maintaining security, fulfilling basic obligations. But perhaps she was doing more. Perhaps she was helping these traumatized children learn to trust again, to hope again, to imagine futures beyond mere survival. The realization was both humbling and terrifying. She'd taken responsibility for their physical safety, yes, but somewhere along the way, she'd also accepted responsibility for their emotional healing. The weight of that was enormous, but as she drifted toward sleep, Elena decided she could carry it. Not easily, not without difficulty, but she could carry it. These children deserved someone willing to bear that weight. And so did Ethan, who'd carried it alone for so long. Together, they could manage. Together, they could give these girls what they needed most. Not just safety, but the chance to be children again. To heal, to grow. To trust that home was more than a temporary stopping point before the next flight. Outside, the mountains stood watch under brilliant stars. Inside, a family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they belonged to each other. And for now, in this moment, that was enough. Morning arrived with an oppressive heaviness in the air that made Elena's instincts scream warnings. The sky was leaden, clouds pressing down like a suffocating blanket. Birds were silent, and even the usual forest sounds seemed muted, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. "Storm coming," Elena announced at breakfast. "A bad one. We need to prepare." The girls had learned to trust her weather sense, moving immediately into action. Lily helped secure shutters, Sophie gathered emergency supplies to the cabin's interior, and even Maggie understood enough to stay close rather than wandering. Ethan worked alongside Elena, battening down anything that could become a projectile in high winds. By noon, the first drops began to fall. Within an hour, it was a deluge unlike anything Elena had seen in years. Rain hammered the cabin roof with such force that conversation became difficult. Wind shrieked through the trees, sending branches crashing down around them. "Everyone stay inside," Elena commanded. "Away from windows. If I tell you to move, you move immediately. Understood?" Four faces nodded at her, pale but trusting. That trust was both a gift and a burden. They believed she could keep them safe. Elena prayed she could live up to that belief. The storm intensified through the afternoon. Water streamed down the mountainside in sheets, overwhelming the drainage channels they'd so carefully constructed. Elena watched through the window, her unease growing. Too much water, too fast. The ground couldn't absorb it quickly enough. "Ethan," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. "I need you to look at something." He joined her at the window. She pointed upslope, where water was beginning to pool in a dangerous way. "See that? The ground's saturated. If enough collects there, she didn't need to finish." Ethan's face went pale. "Landslide? Maybe, maybe not. But we need to be ready to move if—" The mountain answered with a roar that drowned out even the storm. Above them, the hillside was moving. A churning mass of mud, water, rocks and trees, sliding inexorably downward, directly toward the cabin. "Out!" Elena screamed. "Everyone out now! Away from the slope!" Training took over. The girls moved without hesitation, following Elena's pointing arm toward the only safe direction, perpendicular to the slide's path. Ethan scooped up Maggie, Lily grabbed Sophie's hand and they ran. Behind them, the landslide hit with devastating force. The sound was apocalyptic, grinding, roaring, the mountain itself crying out in destruction. Elena didn't look back. Focused solely on getting her family to safety, they reached a rocky outcropping that jutted from the hillside like a shelf. Scrambling onto it, just as the leading edge of the mudslide roared past below. The force was tremendous, a river of earth and debris that would have swept them away like leaves. Elena did a rapid count. 4 children, no 3. Where was Lily? Her heart stopped. Then she saw the girl, still on the lower ground, frozen in terror as the slide's edge churned toward her. Elena moved without thinking, launching herself back down toward Lily. She grabbed the girl's arm and pulled, momentum carrying them both forward and up as mud grasped at their legs. They hit the outcropping together, Elena's shoulder taking the impact, pain shooting through her body. "I've got you," Elena gasped. "You're safe. Everyone's safe." But even as she said it, she was assessing damage. Her shoulder throbbed, possibly dislocated. Lily was trembling but unhurt. The others huddled together, Maggie crying into Ethan's chest while Sophie clutched at his arm with white-knuckled hands. The landslide continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When it finally subsided, the mountainside had been transformed. Where their old cabin had stood, there was now only churned earth and debris. The new cabin, their home, sat at the slide's edge, damaged but miraculously still standing. "Stay here," Elena commanded. "Don't move until I know it's stable." "Your shoulder," Ethan began. "Can wait. Need to assess." She moved carefully, testing each step, watching for signs of continued instability. The new cabin's foundation had held, just barely. One wall was damaged, the roof partially collapsed, but the structure's bones remained intact. Their emergency supplies stored inside appeared accessible. "It's stable enough," she called back. "We can salvage supplies, but we're not staying there tonight." Too risky. They worked quickly despite exhaustion and fear, retrieving what they could. Blankets, food, tools, the emergency kit. Elena moved with her injured arm held close, ignoring the pain that lanced through her with every movement. By the time they'd gathered what they could carry, twilight was falling. The storm had passed, leaving devastation in its wake. Elena led them to a cave she knew about, a shallow but dry shelter that would serve for the night. "Fire first," she directed. "Then we deal with everything else." Lily, her earlier freeze now transformed into determined competence, helped Ethan build a fire. Sophie and Maggie huddled under blankets, shock beginning to set in now that immediate danger had passed. Elena let Ethan examine her shoulder, biting back groans as he carefully manipulated the joint. "Dislocated," he confirmed. "I can set it, but it's going to hurt." "Do it," Elena said through gritted teeth. Lily held her uninjured hand while Ethan worked. The pain was blinding, brilliant, absolute. Elena heard someone screaming and realized it was her. Then the joint popped back into place, and the agony receded to merely excruciating. "Done," Ethan said softly. "You were incredibly brave." "Wasn't brave," Elena managed. "It was necessary." Once her arm was immobilized in a makeshift sling, she turned her attention to the girls. Sophie and Maggie were clearly traumatized, Maggie whimpering softly while Sophie stared at nothing. Even Lily's composure was cracking around the edges. "Listen to me," Elena said, pitching her voice to carry warmth and certainty despite her pain. "Today was terrible, frightening. We almost lost everything. But we didn't. We survived because we worked together, because we trusted each other, because we were prepared." "The cabin," Lily began. "Can be rebuilt," Elena interrupted firmly. "It's damaged, yes, but the foundation held. That's what matters. We built it once, we can repair it. And this time, we know exactly what this mountain can throw at us." "What if there's another slide?" Sophie whispered. "Then we deal with it," Elena replied. "That's what we do. We face what comes and we survive it, together." She looked at each of them in turn. "Today you saw how dangerous these mountains can be. But you also saw that danger can be survived, that we can protect each other. That family means facing the worst together and coming through on the other side." "Is that what we are?" Maggie asked, her voice small in the firelit cave. "A family?" Elena felt her throat tighten. "Yes, that's exactly what we are." The word hung in the air, solid and real despite everything they'd lost. Ethan's hand found Elena's uninjured one, squeezing gently. The girls pressed closer, seeking warmth and comfort and the reassurance of physical proximity. They spent the night in the cave, taking turns keeping watch and tending the fire. Elena's shoulder throbbed, but the pain was manageable. What wasn't manageable was the fear that they'd come so close to losing everything, not just possessions, but each other. When dawn broke, painting the devastated landscape in soft gold, they emerged to survey the damage properly. The landslide had carved a new scar down the mountain. Trees lay toppled like matchsticks. The old cabin was completely gone, buried under tons of earth, but the new cabin stood. Damaged, yes. Requiring significant repair, absolutely. But standing, survivable. "We'll need help," Ethan said, looking at the magnitude of the work ahead. "This is too much for just us." Elena nodded slowly, then made a decision that surprised even her. "Then we'll ask for it. The village, Hank, will ask for help." It was an admission of vulnerability she would never have made before. But she was no longer the woman who'd lived alone for 30 years, trusting no one. She had a family now, responsibilities beyond her own survival. And sometimes, family meant accepting that you couldn't do everything alone. "Come on," she said, gesturing toward the trail that led down to the village. "Let's go see if mountain folk still remember what community means." As they walked, the girls flanking her protectively, Elena felt something shift inside her. The landslide had taken much, but it had also revealed something important. They were strong enough to survive anything. Together, they were unbreakable. The mountains had tested them with fire and water, earth and fear, and they had passed that test. Whatever came next, Elena knew they could face it. Because they weren't facing it alone, they were facing it as a family. The walk down to the village was slow and painful. Elena's shoulder throbbed with every step, and the girls were exhausted, running on fear and adrenaline that was rapidly depleting. But they pressed on, knowing that survival sometimes meant asking for help, even when every instinct screamed for self-reliance. Hank Thompson spotted them first. The old man was outside his cabin, repairing storm damage, when he looked up and saw the bedraggled group emerging from the forest trail. His weathered face registered shock, then concern, then something that might have been respect. "Elena," he called, setting down his tools and moving toward them. "What happened?" "Landslide," Elena replied tersely. Her voice was steady, but fatigue made it thin. "Caught us during the storm. We survived, but the cabin's badly damaged. We need help." She watched Hank's expression, waiting for the judgment, the "I told you so," the suggestion that she should have stayed alone and not risked herself for strangers. Instead, he simply nodded. "Samuel!" he bellowed, his voice carrying across the small cluster of mountain homes. Get Marcus and the Bolton brothers. We've got work to do." Within an hour, half the village had mobilized. News spread quickly in tight-knit mountain communities, and disaster brought people together regardless of previous suspicions or disagreements. Men and women gathered supplies: timber, tools, rope, food, blankets. Children, including several close to Lily's age, collected what they could to help. "We'll have teams working in shifts," Hank organized with practiced efficiency. "First priority is making the cabin weather-tight. Then we'll assess structural damage and plan repairs. Elena, you and the children need rest. Mary's prepared a space for you at her place." Elena opened her mouth to argue, then caught Ethan's eye. He shook his head slightly. Pride, his expression said, had no place here. These people were offering genuine help. Refusing it would be insulting and foolish. "Thank you," Elena said instead, the words feeling foreign but necessary. "We appreciate it." Mary Bolton, a woman about Elena's age with kind eyes and capable hands, stepped forward. "Come on, dear. Let's get that shoulder properly tended and get some food into all of you. You look half dead." "Only half." Elena attempted a joke, earning a surprised laugh from Mary and cautious smiles from her family. At Mary's cabin, the community's support became even more apparent. A proper healer examined Elena's shoulder, confirming Ethan's field treatment had been correct, but adding a better sling and herbal poultices for pain and inflammation. The girls were fed hot soup and fresh bread, wrapped in clean blankets, and allowed to sleep under Mary's watchful care. Ethan stayed with Eleanor as the healer worked, his presence steady and comforting. When they were finally alone, relatively speaking, with Mary bustling in the other room, he spoke quietly. "You saved Lily's life yesterday. I haven't properly thanked you." "No thanks needed," Elena replied, then winced as the movement jarred her shoulder. "She's family." "You protect family? Still, running back into danger, risking yourself." Ethan's voice thickened with emotion. "I know what that cost you." Elena met his eyes. "The cost of not doing it would have been higher. I've lost family before. I'm not losing another." The weight of that statement settled between them. Somewhere in the chaos and fear and desperate survival, these people had become her family in truth, not just obligation. The realization should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. Over the next days, Elena witnessed the power of community in action. Work crews rotated up to the damaged cabin, clearing debris, shoring up weakened structures, replacing damaged sections. The work was hard, but many hands made it manageable. Lily, Sophie, and Maggie integrated surprisingly well with the village children. Initially wary, the girls gradually relaxed under the other children's genuine friendliness. Elena watched Lily laugh for what felt like the first time, saw Sophie share her drawings with village girls who admired her talent, observed Maggie racing around with newfound friends in games that had no desperate edge to them. "They're good kids," Mary observed, sitting beside Elena on her porch. "And you've done right by them. Hank told me he had doubts at first, but seeing how you all handled that landslide, well, that says something about the family you've built." "I didn't build anything," Elena protested. "It just happened." "The best families usually do," Mary replied with a knowing smile. "Chosen family is just as real as blood family. Sometimes more so." On the fourth day, Hank declared the cabin habitable again. Not perfect, not completely repaired, but safe and weather-tight. The village gathered for an impromptu celebration, bringing food to share and treating the cabin's restoration like a community victory. Elena stood at the edge of the gathering, watching her family mingle with neighbors. Ethan was deep in conversation with several men, discussing construction techniques and swapping stories. The girls moved between groups, their earlier wariness replaced with cautious comfort. "You did good," Hank said, appearing at Elena's elbow. "I doubted you. I'll admit that freely. But you proved me wrong. The way you handled that crisis, the way you've raised those girls, the way you've built something real up here. It's impressive." Elena absorbed the praise uncomfortably. "I just did what needed doing." "That's exactly the point," Hank replied. "Most people talk about what they do. You actually did it. And you didn't just survive, you built something worth surviving for. That cabin up there, those children, that man who looks at you like you hung the moon. That's a life, Elena, a real one. Elena felt her throat tighten. I spent 30 years alone, convinced that was the only way. Survive, I was wrong. Maybe you weren't, Hank suggested. Maybe you needed those 30 years to become the person who could handle this. Everything in its time, as my mother used to say. As the celebration continued around them, Elena found herself thinking about time and readiness and the strange paths life took. She'd lost everything once and rebuilt in solitude. Now she'd nearly lost everything again, but this time she hadn't been alone. This time, community had caught her when she fell. Later, as the village folk began to depart, with promises to return if more help was needed, Elena gathered her family together in the restored cabin. The space still smelled of fresh timber and hard work, but it was theirs. Damaged but standing, tested but enduring. I want to say something, Elena began, looking at each face in turn. Before you all came into my life, I thought strength meant isolation. I thought survival required self-sufficiency above all else. But I was wrong. Real strength is accepting that you need others. Real survival is building connections strong enough to catch you when you fall. What are you saying? Lily asked, her serious eyes fixed on Elena. I'm saying that you're not temporary guests anymore. This isn't a transaction, shelter for labor, help for help. This is home. Your home, all of you. For as long as you want to stay. Maggie launched herself at Elena, careful of the injured shoulder. Sophie followed more slowly, tears streaming down her face. Even Lily allowed herself to be pulled into the embrace, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking to reveal the child beneath. Ethan stood slightly apart, emotion playing across his face. Elena extended her good arm toward him. That includes you. You're not just the man helping us survive. You're family, if you want to be. He closed the distance in 2 strides, wrapping his arms around all of them carefully. I want to be, he said, voice rough. More than I've wanted anything in years. They stood together in their patched and restored cabin, a family forged in crisis and solidified through community. The mountains stood eternal outside their walls, indifferent to human drama. But inside, something precious and resilient had taken root. So what now? Sophie asked, wiping her eyes. Elena smiled. Now we live. We plant gardens and repair fences. We tell stories and teach skills. We laugh and argue and make mistakes and forgive each other. We stop just surviving and start actually living. Can we really do that? Maggie wondered. Just live. Without always being ready to run? Elena knelt to meet the child's eyes, ignoring the protest from her shoulder. Yes, we can, we will. Because this is home now, and home means you get to put down roots. That night, as exhaustion finally caught up with all of them, Elena lay in her bed, listening to the familiar sounds of her family settling in around her. The cabin creaked and breathed like a living thing, sheltering them against the mountain night. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from devastating loss, through decades of isolation, to this unexpected second chance at family. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been safe. But it had been worth every moment of fear and doubt and pain. Thank you, Ethan's voice came softly from where he'd made his sleeping space nearby. For everything, for taking us in, for protecting us, for making us a family. Thank you for bringing life back into mine, Elena replied. I didn't know how much I needed it until you arrived. Silence settled, comfortable and safe. And as Elena drifted towards sleep, she felt a peace she hadn't known since before the landslide that had taken her first family. She'd survived that loss and built a life from ruins. Now she'd survived again and rebuilt again, but this time she hadn't done it alone. The mountains had tested her with isolation, with strangers, with storms and slides and community judgment. She'd passed every test, not through strength alone, but through the willingness to open her guarded heart and let others in. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The cabin would need more work. The girls would need continued teaching and healing. The village would continue watching, judging, forming opinions. And somewhere out there, perhaps, the danger that had sent Ethan running with 3 orphaned children still lurked. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight they were safe together home, and that, Elena thought as sleep finally claimed her, was enough. 3 months had passed since the landslide, and the mountain showed its autumn colors, brilliant reds and golds that painted the forest in fire. Elena stood outside the cabin, now fully restored and even improved from its original design, watching her family move through their morning routines with practiced ease. Lily was teaching Sophie and Maggie how to identify the last of the season's edible plants, her voice carrying the same patient authority Elena used. Sophie sketched in a journal Mary had given her, documenting plants and animals with an artist's eye and a naturalist's precision. Maggie helped Ethan repair a section of fence, chattering constantly while actually being useful despite her young age. It looked, Eleanor thought with satisfaction, like a life. Not just survival, but actual living. Coffee. Ethan appeared at her elbow, offering a steaming mug. Elena accepted gratefully. When did we get fancy enough for coffee? Mary brought it up last week. Said we'd earned a few luxuries. He leaned against the porch railing beside her. Hard to believe how much has changed. Hard to believe how much has stayed the same, Elena countered. The mountains are still harsh. Winter's coming and it'll test us. Danger doesn't disappear just because we want it to. But we face it together now, Ethan said. That's the difference. Elena nodded, sipping her coffee and savoring both the taste and the companionship. 3 months ago, sharing coffee would have felt too intimate, too vulnerable. Now it felt natural, right? I've been thinking, Ethan said carefully, about the future. About making this permanent. Elena's heart skipped. Permanent how? The girls need schooling beyond what we can teach them. They need friends, community, normal childhood experiences. The village has a small school. Mary mentioned it. If we enrolled them there, brought them down for lessons a few times a week, they'd be more visible, Elena said slowly. More chance of being noticed, yes, Ethan acknowledged. But they'd also be more integrated, more protected by community ties. And honestly, after 3 months, with no sign of pursuit, I'm starting to think we really did lose the trail. That we're actually safe here. Elena wanted to believe it. But caution was a hard habit to break. Oh, they're being patient, watching, waiting. Maybe, Ethan agreed. But we can't live in fear forever. At some point, we have to decide that we're actually building a life, not just hiding from death. The words hit hard because they were true. Elena had spent 3 decades hiding from life after loss. She'd survived, yes, but survival wasn't the same as living. These children deserve better than mere survival. We'll think about it, Elena said finally. Talk to the girls, see what they want. This affects them most. That evening, they gathered around the dinner table, a real table now, built by Ethan with wood donated by the village. The meal was substantial, garden vegetables and preserved meat, bread baked in their own oven. Simple but satisfying, the food of a household that had found its rhythm. We want to talk to you about something, Elena began, and 3 pairs of eyes fixed on her with varying degrees of wariness. Old habits died hard. You're not sending us away? Maggie asked immediately, fear flashing across her small face. Never, Elena said firmly. This is about moving forward, not apart. Ethan and I have been discussing school. She explained the idea. Regular lessons in the village, integration with other children, education beyond what she and Ethan could provide. She watched the girls' faces carefully, reading excitement warring with fear. Would we still live here? Lily asked, her practical mind immediately assessing logistics. Yes, this is home. But you'd spend a few days a week in the village for lessons. What if someone recognizes us? Sophie's voice was small. What if the bad men find out where we are? Ethan leaned forward. I won't lie to you. There's always risk, but it's been months with no sign of pursuit. And the more we integrate here, the more protection we have. These people know us now, trust us. They wouldn't let anything happen to you. It's your choice, Elena added. All of you. We're not forcing anything, but you need to understand that hiding forever isn't really living. At some point, you have to decide whether you're going to let fear control your life. The girls exchanged looks, that silent communication Elena had learned to recognize. Finally, Lily spoke for all of them. We want to go to school. We want to have friends. She paused, choosing words carefully. We want to be normal. Even if it's scary, nothing about our family is normal, Elena said with a slight smile. But we can aim for ordinary. And we'll do it together. Over the following weeks, arrangements were made. The girls would attend the village school 3 days a week, staying with Mary on those nights. Hank vouched for them to the school teacher, explaining enough of their situation, orphaned, traumatized, needing stability, without revealing everything. The first day of school arrived with a mixture of excitement and terror. Elena walked the girls down to the village, Ethan carrying supplies. Lily maintained her usual composure, but her grip on Sophie's hand was tight. Sophie clutched her journal like a lifeline. Maggie bounced between nerves and enthusiasm, her resilience both admirable and heartbreaking. At the schoolhouse, a dozen children aged 5 to 14 waited with their teacher, a middle-aged woman named Ruth, who had kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. The village children regarded the newcomers with curiosity, but not hostility. You must be the Morrison girls, Ruth said, using the name Elena had suggested they adopt. Better to have a family name, to seem more permanently settled. Yes, ma'am, Lily replied, straightening her shoulders. Welcome. We're glad to have you. Now let's get you settled. Elena wanted to stay, to make sure they were safe and accepted. But she also knew that hovering would mark them as different, as fragile. So she knelt, hugged each girl quickly and whispered, You're strong. You're smart. You're going to be fine. Then she and Ethan walked back up the mountain, leaving their children to navigate this new world alone. That was harder than facing the landslide, Elena admitted, once they were out of sight of the village. Much harder, Ethan agreed. But necessary. They need this. The cabin felt too quiet without the girls' chatter and movement. Elena threw herself into work, harvesting the last of the garden, preserving food for winter, making repairs. Ethan worked alongside her, but both of them kept glancing at the trail, as if the girls might appear at any moment. We're pathetic, Elena said with a rueful laugh. They've been gone 4 hours and we're already lost without them. Welcome to parenthood, Ethan replied. Apparently it's all worrying and second-guessing and missing them, even when you desperately needed the quiet. They were preparing dinner when they heard voices on the trail. The girls appeared, tired but glowing, talking over each other about their day. Ruth had been kind. The other children had been welcoming. The lessons had been challenging but interesting. Sophie had made a friend. Maggie had learned a new game. Even Lily's careful control had cracked enough to reveal genuine happiness. It was good. Elena asked, needing to hear it confirmed. It was really good, Lily replied, and her smile was real and unguarded. We want to go back. Over the following months, a routine established itself. 3 days in the village for school and socializing, 4 days on the mountain for work and family time. The girls thrived, their confidence growing with each successful navigation of normal childhood experiences. They made friends, learned academic subjects Elena couldn't teach, and began to heal in ways that isolation couldn't facilitate. Elena watched the transformation with wonder and pride. Lily slowly released her grip on constant vigilance, allowing herself to be a child again. Sophie's artistic talent flourished with proper materials and encouragement. Maggie's natural brightness, no longer dimmed by fear, made her a favorite among the village children. Winter came, harsh and testing as mountain winters always were. But they were prepared, food preserved, firewood stacked, the cabin weatherproofed. They spent long evenings by the fire, telling stories, playing simple games, teaching and learning from each other. During one particularly brutal blizzard that kept them confined for days, Ethan asked Elena the question she'd been both expecting and dreading. "What are we exactly?" "You and me." Elena looked up from the sock she was darning. The girls were asleep in their room. The fire crackled comfortingly. The moment felt simultaneously momentous and perfectly natural. "I don't know," she admitted. "Partners? Co-parents? Friends? Could we be more?" Ethan's voice was careful, respectful of her answer, whatever it might be. Elena set down her darning and really looked at him. This man who had appeared in her clearing with 3 desperate children and an impossible request, who had worked himself to exhaustion building them a home, who had stood beside her through crisis after crisis, never faltering, never demanding more than she could give. "I lost a family once," Elena said slowly. "I thought I'd never risk that kind of pain again. But then you showed up and gave me no choice." "I'm sorry, don't be," Elena interrupted. "You gave me back something I thought was gone forever. Purpose, connection, love, though I was too stubborn to call it that for months." She paused, gathering courage. "So yes, we could be more. We already are more, really. We've just been too cautious to say it out loud." Ethan's smile was brilliant and unguarded. "I love you, Elena Morrison. I have for months." "I love you too," Elena replied, and saying it out loud felt like shedding the last protective barrier around her heart. "I love you and those 3 incredible girls who've become mine as surely as if I'd given birth to them." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "The girls are going to be insufferable about this," Ethan predicted. "They've been dropping hints for weeks." "Let them," Elena said. "They deserve to see that healing is possible, that love after loss is possible, that families can be built as well as born." As winter gradually released its grip and spring began to hint at arrival, Elena stood once more on the cabin porch, surveying the transformed landscape. The mountain was greening, life returning after the dormant season. Below, in the village, her daughters were learning and playing and building lives. Beside her, Ethan planned improvements to the cabin for the coming year. Around her, the forest that had been her only companion for 3 decades now sheltered a family. She thought about the woman she'd been when Ethan first appeared. Isolated, guarded, convinced that survival required solitude. That woman wouldn't recognize the Elena Morrison who now stood here, part of a family, integrated into a community. Her heart fully open despite the risks. The mountains had tested her with every hardship they possessed: loss, isolation, suspicion, storm, and landslide. She'd passed those tests not through strength alone, but through the willingness to trust, to connect, to love, despite the danger of loss. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, wrapping an arm around her waist. "That I spent 30 years surviving," Elena replied. "But now I'm actually living. And living is so much better." She looked at the man beside her, thought of the 3 girls who'd become her daughters, remembered the community that had caught them when they fell. This was her life now, messy, complicated, risky, and absolutely worth every moment of vulnerability it required. The mountains stood eternal, indifferent to human joy and sorrow. But in this clearing, in this cabin, within this chosen family, Elena had found something stronger than mountains: love that endured, connections that held, and the courage to build a future despite the impossibility of guarantees. She had survived loss and rebuilt in isolation. Now she'd survived again and rebuilt with others. The first had taught her strength. The second had taught her that strength was most powerful when shared. "Come on," she said to Ethan, tugging him toward the cabin. We have work to do before the girls get home. And I promised Maggie we'd start planting the herb garden today. He followed, laughing, and Elena felt joy bubble up inside her, uncomplicated, full, real. This was life. Not perfect, never safe, always challenging, but real and shared and absolutely worth every risk. The mountains whispered their eternal song around the cabin. Inside, a family lived and loved and built their future one day at a time. And Elena Morrison, once solitary and guarded, now open and connected, smiled at the beautiful impossibility of it all. She had found her way home. Not to a place, but to people. Not to isolation, but to belonging. And that, she knew with absolute certainty, was worth everything. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.